So the Culling games have been really interesting and is shaping up to potentially be the best current arc in Jujutsu Kaisen. But currently with the colonies looking to be done, and with the new events that we got with Yuki and Kenjaku, as well as the potential of the military sources invading the colonies, I want to rank what is the best colonies and see which one were my favourites and give my opinions on each colony. I've done a separate video where I talked about just mainly the fights before the introduction of Sakujumu, but this is going to be encapsulating everything in terms of the colony, so not just the fight itself, and we'll start off with number 4, which is Sakura Jumu. So this in my opinion had the strongest start, had a lot of highs and I had a lot of lows for me personally. Some of the things I love, and I'll talk about that at the start, was first Kamo's introduction. Kamo's introduction in terms of him and his first conversation with Kenjaku. That was hella intriguing to me, and we learned one of the biggest reveals in that Kenjaku has taken over the Kamo clan. We also get to learn something intriguing in terms of, does Kenjaku have some ability of memory manipulation in being able to switch the opinion, the caretaker of the Kamo clan, to think that he was the previous head of the Noritoshi Kamo. But to take it to a step further, it gave us the first kind of motion of Kenjaku's plan and how he began to manipulate other people. But similarly, it gave me a new revelation for somebody such as Kamo, and I believe Kamo and Maki's dynamic worked well, with them both having similar ideals of wanting to be their clan heads, but ended up being ostracized. We then get to see one of his best speeches where he said he would set his heart ablaze and doing what he needed to do to support his people, as well as we had that tragic little introduction with his backstory where he wanted to go see his family again but ended up seeing that his mom had moved on. And then the most important revelation with the fact that his mom had explained why he claimed him Noritoshi Kamo, because he wanted him to abandon the clan head and to come back to her. I think that whole storyline was interesting, and it gives us a nice indication of potentially the latter stages of Kamo maybe getting over his trauma and mommy issues and being able to become an important character in the future. He currently went into a very self-sacrificial area, but now we could see him potentially grow and potentially become a true clan head and a person worthy of inhabiting the blood manipulation technique. One of my most important and my favourite part of the colony was Maki's epiphany. We got some of the most important spreads and development of Maki and the one of self and etc. And we saw the struggles of Maki as a character. First, a lot of people were intriguing to see her point of view in terms of how she felt after the massacre of the Zenin clan, but we got to see a more in-depth view in terms of how she felt as if she was content with just being able to be on the level of everybody else, but lacked that strong sense of self to be able to get to the next level. So this arc kind of details through her kind of epiphany and growth, being able to become not only stronger, but to be able to find new revelations in herself and be able to accept the current situation and finally get to that level of Toji. I think her whole character development was well, and even some of the weaknesses that she talked about in herself, being able to not look for her actual sensei because she tried to focus and grow stronger through herself, being ostracized from her clan members. Meeting people such as Daido and Miyu allowed her to not only become stronger, but to be able to reshape her mentality and to become the level of Toji and potentially stronger, which we will see in the future. I think her whole epiphany was great, and the brief conversation with Mai had some interest in me. I think it could have been better, but I think it gave us a nice indication to finally, did we learn that her sword is the same as somebody such as Toji's, which is one of the most broken swords in the series. We also got to learn about a big revelation in terms of how she can deal with domain counters, being immune to domain barriers as well. Gave us a whole new buff to heavenly restriction for those like myself who previously thought that they could be affected by domain. I know that is not the same for everybody, but now it gave us a whole new revelation how strong heavenly restriction can be and why they are deemed the breakers of fate. And there we get to my negatives, and well, I'll start with the biggest negative, and that is Naoya. I'm going to have a whole video where I talk about Naoya potentially being a wasted antagonist, but I didn't really like him coming back that much after his whole conclusion because I felt as if he didn't learn from anything and he was just kind of boring and flat as a character in general. He had interesting moments at the beginning because I thought him coming back as a vengeful spirit was intriguing because his main goal was revenge, but similarly he really didn't learn anything from anything of his character story and he kind of regressed as a character, for he was far more interesting as a human being rather than a vengeful spirit. Now, I don't think he's necessarily a fan favorite, but his domain was pretty cool, and I think his domain was one of the best that we've seen. But similarly, we barely got to see it, and it felt as if the whole kind of ending part of the arc was very flat and quick, as well as a person who has projection sorcery that can cause people to get frozen did not only use it correctly on the ground, but decided to just zip around in the air and not really do anything. Now I understand he's trying to build speed, but even the kind of booms that we saw when it would destroy parts of the area when he would build up speed, I just feel as if, did he not use any intelligence to potentially use that against the opponents he was fighting? It felt as if it just felt like a wasted character in my personal opinion. I don't have much expectation of Naoya as a character in general because he's not as intriguing as the other antagonists, but I thought bringing him back he could have served a bigger purpose in the story, and that's just my personal opinion. Similarly, this could come to a situation where some people like to say that it's fitting for his ending because he's somebody who was insignificant and thought he was better than what he did. And I agree and disagree because I understand your sentiment in terms of that, but I felt as if what was the point of really bringing him back as a vengeful spirit, because his main kind of goal in terms of dealing with the clan head struggles was already completed in his previous fight with Maki in perfect preparation. It's my biggest weakness in terms of the colony, because I felt as if the antagonist didn't really move me compared to the other colonies where we had so many more intriguing characters, whether that was Uru, Ryu, Kashimo and Hikaruma. And then we got to Daido and Miyu. I thought they were interesting characters, but it kind of felt they came out of random. And listen, I have no beef with them in total, but it's just they're kind of there and I'm not really seeing what is the purpose for them in the future. I believe in Gege to do something nicely with their characters. However, I was expecting both of them to die when we got into Naoya's domain, but them surviving, it kind of makes me think what is really the need for them in the future. But I guess we'll have to see how Gege cooks and ties them into the story. And then my final kind of weakness was Kamo had a strong start and a very, very poor finish. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, he passed out, did what he can do to stall Naoya so Maki could get ready. Him just being a person to stall and then to pass out, it was kind of like, I felt a little bit disappointed, even though I do believe there's going to be something with Kamo in the future. But I guess that is just how I perceived it, and it could be a situation where I had high expectations for his character, which could potentially be used later, or maybe just not fulfilled, and that is not the purpose of his story. At the end of the day, I think as if my overall rating for Sakurajima is a 7.5 out of 10. The highs were some of my favorite in the Culling gaming period, and like I said, the Maki growth was one of my favorites. But similarly, there was a lot of things I didn't really like overall, and that's just my whole interpretation, and that would be number 4, Sakurajima. Now number 3, and this is going to be contradictory because if you see my thing, I do believe this is the best fight, but as a colony overall, it's not as strong, and that is Tokyo number 2. So, my rating for this is actually a strong 9.5 out of 10, and I really rate this colony. I think the fight is arguably the best in Hikari versus Kashimo. However, Charles didn't really move me as a character, and I thought Hikari speed blitzing Charles was fun, but it was just fun. That was all there is to it. In terms of actual development from the characters, we didn't get to see enough. However, we got to see some intriguing things with one, Kashimo backstory with having a relationship with Kenjaku, and seeing that his main goal of being reincarnated is to fight Sukuna. We also got to see the power system be used to its fullest, seeing how Hikari was be able to use one of the most broken jackpots, not only be able to loop his domains into have multiple domain expansions, but being able to become immortal and have unlimited curse energy. We're still awaiting to see what his 777 jackpot is, as well as seeing what Kashimo's curse technique is. So there's a lot of intrigue that could come up, and I believe introducing these characters was great, and Kashimo lived up to the hype in being one of the most intriguing Culling game antagonists. The most underrated parts in my personal opinion being Panda, his whole thing with losing his cores and understanding a little bit more of how the cores work. It comes full circle with the whole thing that we got to see with Yaga and how he makes his curse corpse, each individual one actually coming with their own personality, and I thought it was a really wholesome individual part, even before Panda got tore to shreds, what looked like elite level animal abuse. I mean, free my guy Panda, he got disrespected by Kashimo, but it was to be expected with how strong Kashimo is as a character. But I believe I have a lot more positives than negatives. The only reason I put it down is because I believe the other colonies had more intriguing things overall, as well as having fights that are still close to Hikari versus Kashimo for me personally. But I believe overall is one of my favorite colonies. It's a strong, like I said, 9.5 out of 10. I don't really have that many negatives, which maybe we could have explored character more, but I guess that is not necessarily needed right now. And I think it was a nice starting point for an introduction to their characters, and I'm excited to see what both of these characters do in the future. I'm also on the minuscule side of being a person who actually really liked Hikari's jackpot and his ability being made of luck, and especially being with a person who begins to rig his domains, especially as the fact that it's based on a pachinko machine. I think Hikari and both Kashimo lived up to the hype, and I love their characters. And then number 2, we have Tokyo number 1 colony, and I think the Tokyo number 1 colony was amazing. We got Yuji's development with somebody such as Hikaruma, and we got to see him accept himself as a cog and really begin to understand his mindset after the pre-Shibuya, accept the responsibility of the things that happened. However, we still expect growth for him and be able to not only stop blaming himself, but get to a situation where he becomes strong enough to protect the people that he wants. I take it to a step further, his interactions with somebody such as Higuruma is some of my favorites, and Higuruma, in my opinion, is arguably the best Culling game antagonist, with his story being so well in a short period of chapters. We got his introduction to why his decline into becoming the person he is and losing faith in the justice system, and his whole domain expansion being that of a courtroom was amazing, and I think it fit his personality very well. He's also arguably the best prodigy we've seen in the series, learning the domain expansion, learning his inner workings of his curse technique, learning curse energy all in a span of 2 weeks, and I'm very excited if we do get to see more of him in the future, how his character will play out in the future. By his sympathy for somebody such as Yuji and being able to dispel the domain to allow him to win to then give him the points was one of the most intriguing conversations that we got, and I think it really cemented a very good way in which Gege didn't have to give a necessarily satisfying fight, but more so the dialogue and interactions between the characters carried hard. This is why I have it second, because even though, in my opinion, if you've seen the video, that this is the worst fight in total, the character interactions and the way in which Gege begins to characterize characters through fights is one of my favorite moments in Jujutsu Kaisen, and is why I personally get annoyed when people say there has been a lack of substance in terms of character development in the Culling games, because not only does he do it through his fights, he does it in a great way as well. By taking it to the second part of the colony, and that is Megumi versus Reggie, which is arguably the most underrated fight, has risen so much for me as we go on in the series. We get to meet the GOAT Takaba, who's one of the most intriguing curse techniques in comedian. But take it to a step further, we really got to see Megumi in his element and not only begin to trust his friends, but to be able to get to a situation where he showcases the level of individuality needed to push himself as a sorcerer. We first get to the point where he did not once look to summon Makuraga, which is a very key thing for Megumi. Use his genius against a very tough sorcerer in Reggie, curse technique that directly counters Megumi. And that fight is one of the best tactical fights that we've seen in the series, and it was a very good showcase of an attrition style warfare where two fighters were doing great unpredictability and being able to one-up each other. By taking it to a step further, I think Reggie has become underrated as a character, not necessarily in just his technique, but he was one of the few people who had great accurate information in terms of Kenjaku's plan and depiction of how the Culling game would go. He said that this was just a front for plan 1, 2 or 3 or potential things that could come and occur. But taking that to a step further, he gave us a nice indication that he has known a relationship with both Tengen and Kenjaku. We also get to see Angel, who ended up saving Megumi, and we got one of the most eerie messages at the end with Reggie when he loses his fight with Megumi, who says, "Let fate toy with you till you die like a fool." This unfortunately potentially foreshadows a bad ending for my boy Megumi, but it was a beautiful, beautiful colony, and overall seeing Megumi and Yuji in their element, being able to not only fight against these sorcerers, but to be able to get great character development for their characters was done well, and is set up for nice things in the future when we eventually got to see them again in the Culling game. And this colony, in my opinion, is a nice 10 out of 10. I believe, yes, the fight might not be as strong or the best in my opinion like Hikari versus Kashimo, but I think Megumi and Reggie is right there in terms of a fight, and it was very, very well done. But it had some of the best character development, as the same as somebody such as the Maki colony, and it really showcases the way in which Gege can really develop his characters through the use of fights as well. And then number 1 is the Sendai colony. I think the Sendai colony had a nice balance of between all of them in terms of characterization, as well as arguably the best fight in the Culling game as well. Being able to do a battle royale in that manner and make the choreography so done well was beautiful. And for the huge Utah fans, you get to see Utah for the first time in a very long time with one of the coldest drops. After the 3 months of Night of Parade, he became a special grade, only second to Satoru Gojo in his unusual abilities. But to take it to a step further, we got to see Utah's characterization and not only see his ability of mimicry being used fully, as well as seeing Rika for the first time in a long time. But we got to see one of the most important things which could indicate a potential switch in mindset for Utah in the future, where he said just this once he would enjoy the fight with Ryu based on how he looked in the fight. I think that has become very underrated for Utah and his self, because he is a person who does not enjoy fighting, but him deciding to take that step could indicate that there is something important to come, and maybe contradicts with Uro and Ryu's comments of him not being strong enough to get to that level of Sukuna and Gojo. The ruthlessness, the aggression needed, but he even contradicted some parts with him saying that he does not want to kill them because he needed the points. But similarly, it showcased a nice way of how Utah came into a high stakes combat against 2 elite level sorcerers and still managed to come out on top. And then we got to meet somebody who, in my opinion, is the one of the most intriguing Culling game antagonists, being Uro, and it is in my top 3. A whole talk about the lore with potentially Utah being from the Jiwara clan, as well as the potential of her whole storyline of potentially coming from the underworld, which is something that we're expecting to see in the future. But taking that to a step further, her whole plotline resides in getting revenge. She was set up and was an assassin in the hardest era, being the High-End era, and had an ability that was one of my favorites, being sky manipulation. But the whole concept means she has something to play in the future, and I'm very intrigued to see her in again, and potentially, hopefully, we get to see her domain expansion. And then we got the Chad himself, man like Ryu Ishiguro, who is just raw. He's a raw guy, he was amazing. I love the fact that he had the highest curse energy output and gave us a nice introduction to output versus reinforcement, in which we know how strong Utah's reinforcement is. His ability of Granate Blaster gives us an indication of something cool in terms of being able to use a beam from his head and to be able to input his curse energy. Moreover, him boxing Rika, I mean, how could you not like him? He just showcased a great level of excitement every time he was in the story, and I just rate his character heavy, even though his goal is as simple as being unsatisfied from fights in the past. But to take it to a step further, we got to see even Kururushi, who was an interesting curse, and I think his ability of being able to be reincarnated in the fight could showcase good things in the future for people such as disaster curses if they are to come back in this modern timeline. But to take it to a step further, we got to see even though he had one of the most limited screen times in Druth being pretty much off screen, but the fact that he had 2 incarnations, it could give us a lot of things to theorize in the future in regard to the potential, and hopefully, I don't know when I'm going to drop this video about the first Culling game theory, the potential that Culling game could have happened in the past, and potentially why somebody such as Angel does not like the use of reincarnation in general. But I feel as if the whole Sendai colony had the perfect balance between characterization as well as fights. It's an easy 10 out of 10, even though we got blueballed by the fact that we got our 3-way domain expansion. Even knowing that these socials have a domain expansion means I hope Gege is cooking something for them in the future. But really my only negative is the fact that we didn't get to see the domain. Being able to see a 3-way domain in its totality, and we're still at this current juncture unable to see what actually happens in domain wars in general. It would have been very nice to see, and I think being able to see Uro talk about the fact of beating Sukuna and what it needs to get to that level. The whole colony had everything, and we had Miwa pull up, potentially looking mischievous. Listen, I'm gonna keep my opinions to myself about Miwa, because even though I like to troll and push that Miwa is Kashimo's ancestor because they have the same color, I think Gege's lying to all of you, man. He's psyching up Miwa for her to not be useful, I'm telling you. But listen, if Miwa does get something of huge intrigue in the future, I'll be excited to see how the character is used. And that would be my rankings for the Culling game thus far. And let me know what you think of my rankings for the colonies. Let me know your personal opinion on the colonies ranked. And let me know your opinions on my thoughts on each colonies and what I liked and disliked about all of them. So to conclude, it's Sendai, Tokyo 1, Tokyo 2, and Sakura Jumo. Thank you guys for watching, and make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe.